All right. So thank you, everybody. Today we have two guests. We're working with Jillian Bonnardeaux and Ryan Jones. And I'll just briefly introduce everybody before we get going. So Jillian Bonnardeaux is a diplomat with the U.S. Foreign Service, a native of Chicago. She graduated from Penn State with degrees in media studies and political science, and obtained a master's from American University in international peace and conflict resolution. She has spent time working in DC and worked in a variety of locations all over the world, including Vietnam, Zimbabwe, and Ghana. Um, from 2017 to 2020, she served as the spokesperson for the U.S. Embassy in Thailand, and then served in Hawaii. And most recently, she's taken up the position of counselor for public affairs at the U.S. Embassy in Norway. And we are very grateful to have her today. Ryan Jones is a journalist who has served in a variety of positions in the United States. He's a native of Southern California and attended high school in Arizona. He attended Penn State and spent 3 years at the Collegian as a sports writer, and wrote for newspapers in Wilkes-Barre and Bergen, New Jersey, before moving to New York City, where he served on the staff of Slam magazine, a basketball monthly, for 7 years, serving as editor-in-chief for his final two. He now is the editor of the Penn Stater Magazine, the magazine of the Penn State Alumni Association. And we are also very grateful to have him. So I suppose we should start off with the Collegian. So the first question I have for Jillian and Ryan is just tell us about your time at Penn State and your time at the Collegian, and the memories you have of that time.
Yeah, so I, came to Penn State wanting to do journalism, wanting to study journalism, and the Collegian was one of the biggest reasons. The College of Com, I think at the time, the reputation wasn't as strong as it is now, but the Collegian's reputation was terrific, and so I came in with really I didn't even work at a high school paper, but I knew that's what I wanted to do. And so I was in the fall of '92 candidate class, spent my freshman year in Altoona, and then got up to University Park. And got on right away. And, it was definitely the defining experience of my time at Penn State. 3 years on staff, as you mentioned, primarily as a sports reporter covering, fencing, golf, tennis, basketball, football, softball. I'm sure I'm forgetting something. And then having a chance to be sports editor for a summer as well. And also was able to kind of do some writing for the art staff. My roommate at the time, Mark Correa, he was the arts editor for a while, and I was a sports editor, so we kind of switched. He was a sports fan and I was into music, so we would write for each other, and that always kind of planted the seed from early on that you don't have to sort of narrow yourself into one spot. So obviously great friendships. My wife and I met in the Collegian, and we've been married almost 20 years now, and so obviously it's been a huge impact on my life, both professionally and personally. And I was a little sad, needless to say, as I think many of us from that era were, when the James Building came down. But my son, we live right in the borough here in State College, and my son, who's a 16-year-old now, I had noticed in walking by that there was one brick left when they were done with the demolition, before they started to build a new building there. And so I mentioned to him, I said, listen, I'm not saying you should do this, but if you ever think you could reach that brick, it would be a neat thing to have, for Mom and I to have. It's the building we met in and everything. And so I didn't ask too many questions, but he managed to bring the brick home. So it's like a nice little keepsake in our office now. So the Collegian, continues to be a huge part of our lives symbolically, and but really, a formative experience. I learned a ton from, a great news advisor, and from great colleagues and editors and friends. And yeah, so really, really important and meaningful experience. It continues to have a big impact in my life.
Great. Nice to meet you, Ryan. I also went to Penn State to be a journalism major and had a couple of different varieties of experiences there, including working with the Collegian. I also ended up working with Penn State Sports Information. I don't know what it's called now, or if it exists in the same vein, but that was a lot of fun. And so I did both concurrently for a little while, but eventually ended up doing a little more work with some local magazines and so on, and ended up looking at a career in diplomacy much down the road, but really think back often and do a lot of career talks about how my interest in journalism and my training and experiences back in the Collegian really helped me get a sense of what the purpose was of asking questions and building audiences and trying to think about what it is that people want to know and why, and frame what I do. So I know it's kind of a funny angle to come at in terms of journalism, but using these skills as a diplomat. But I feel like I do every day, and I end up working with journalists every day from a different perspective from the other end. And so I'd be happy to talk a little bit about that and how those relationships and learning how it feels to be asking the questions has really framed how I engage with journalists who are now asking me the questions, or how I prepare my ambassador or senior officials or official spokespeople when I'm not the official spokesperson, how I prepare them to be honest and genuine. And I think above all, kind of always give proof of life. I think the thing that I learned a lot being on the front lines as a journalist was it was always so frustrating when people just didn't get back to you or didn't understand that I was on a time crunch, or that I had an editor who was, asking me where's the story, and I couldn't put it in unless I had all the right people checked off to get those perspectives. So I think what I try to do in my professional life now is really offer proof of life. I can't give you an answer today, but I got your request, or things like that. So a lot of those tricks of the trade are things that I talk about in our diplomatic training workshops for people who go into public affairs in that cone, in that part of an embassy work or foreign service work. So I'd be happy to talk more about those kinds of things too. But I feel, Ryan, like I didn't meet my husband at Penn State, but some of my lifelong friends are still in that area, and I have a great sweet spot for State College, and brought my kids back too, and they love it.
Great. I mean, I think from the job titles, we can get a general sense of what you guys do, but I guess if you don't mind, take us through like a day-to-day. I mean, what does a normal day look like for each of you at the Penn Stater and at the embassy in Oslo?
Jillian, I'll go first only because I don't want to have to follow you, because your job's so much more interesting than mine, I think. So if you're okay with that?
Please, yes.
So yeah, my day-to-day, I'm right here on campus in the Hintz Family Alumni Center, I don't know, 100 yards from the Willard Building and Carnegie. So, we're pretty close to the heart of campus, and we're here every day, which I love. Being back on campus and being around you guys, being around students, is energizing. I mean, it's kind of a cliche, but I think it's really true. You definitely feel like you're part of the university being right here. And so I really have always valued that. I'm sort of constantly having to remind myself. In the past year and a half, obviously, it's been tough for that. But always trying to take advantage of opportunities to get out, even just to go for a walk across campus and just see how things feel, right? Walk through the hub, or occasionally sit on a class or something like that. I just really have appreciated those opportunities to be working here. Day to day for us, we're a bi-monthly magazine, print, and then we just this year launched a magazine website in 2021. Because we decided, maybe this whole internet thing's not a fad, and we'll see if we'll give it a shot. We're a membership organization for the Alumni Association, so there was just not a lot of pressure historically for us to go online, because the print edition was really well received by our members, and so and having to go online, then okay, is it a fully password protective thing? It was just all these things that we basically just kind of kept putting it off forever. So our sort of big goal when I became editor about 3 years ago and made it kind of our big project during the pandemic was to get the magazine online. So our day-to-day has changed a little bit in the past 6 months, because in addition to being on this every 2 months print production cycle, we're also thinking about going online, which obviously you guys have, had to be doing, you guys were reading online, I'm sure your whole lives pretty much, and certainly at the Collegian, publishing heavily online, and as most folks in journalism have been. So we're late to that. But it's, the print production cycle, like I said, it's every 2 months, and we kind of get in a rhythm with that. And, we're we're trying to figure out our feature well, both, for an issue or two out. We get tons of ideas from everywhere, from off campus, from on campus, from alumni, from students and faculty and staff, never short of ideas for features for us. And we're trying to kind of cover our alumni through profiles and things like that. We're trying to cover student life, trying to cover research and faculty issues, highlight those things. Trying to cover the university generally. So there's a ton that we can cover. Pretty much any story that has some sort of Penn State angle is fair game for us. We do not have to, run our things by the administration first. We don't have to ask permission to write about things. Some things are sensitive. And so obviously we have to kind of play ball at times and say, okay, hey, this one's a little, how do we approach this? Or how do we, approach this person? But for the most part, we've got a pretty high level of independence there. Which is really nice. And I probably wouldn't have wanted to be here if it weren't the case. So it's a really, we try to mix it up. We try to mix up the tone of our stories. We try to, have a profile and have a Q&A and have a narrative that's, maybe digs into something a little bit deeper. We try to mix those things up, and we try to focus on some campus things and off-campus things, some alumni, some students, some nostalgia looking back, what's going on currently. We really try to always mix those things up so that wherever you're coming from as an alum, as a member, whether you're just out of school or you're in your 80s or 90s or anywhere in between, we're hoping that there's something in there for everybody. So it's, the day-to-day, depending on the time of where we are in the production cycle, we're, right now we're sort of ramping up in the last few weeks for our January, February issues. So it's starting to get pretty busy. Our feature well is finalized. We're into some editing rounds on things, but we're still finalizing some other copies. So but also trying to plan ahead a little bit for the next one. So it's a little bit of everything all the time, but it's a really fun job, and it's never ever boring, which is really the thing that I love most about it. 15 years in, we never run out of things to talk about, and again, any story, as long as there's a Penn State angle, like I said, it's fair game for us, and so it really keeps it interesting and fresh that way.
I love that. I think I'd say the same. My job is never, ever boring. And I would tell all of you that if you get into a routine or a job that you find boring, make a change, because I do love what I do. And Ryan, I'll have to talk to you afterwards. I stopped getting the Penn Stater Magazine. It may be because I move around a lot as a diplomat, but I'll try and rectify that. So a day in the life, there's so many different things. I made some notes here, things that I wasn't sure you'd like to talk about. And James, I want to leave time for Q&A as well. But a couple of things I thought might be interesting to hear about. So in public affairs at an embassy, what are we branding? We're branding America. We're branding America overseas. And so everywhere that I go, you mentioned some of the places. I was about 10 years in Southeast Asia, about 5 years in Africa. And now I just came up here to Scandinavia, and we're really looking at a lot of Arctic issues and kind of NATO alliance issues and so on. But when it all comes down to it, I need to know what the media environment is and how I can communicate about America in this environment. And so I'll give some examples if it's helpful between Thailand and Norway. They're super different, but I can say that in Thailand, when I was there, we have a very big push from the neighbor to the north, which is China, looking to see how they can really increase their market share, if you will, of influence. And so what we were trying to do is figure out how we can tell a true story there about what America does to invest in the country. We had the largest CDC office outside of Atlanta. Honest true story, when I got there in 2017, I had to explain to people, like on talks like this, what CDC was. So look at how the world has changed. Everybody knows CDC now. So we would find in Africa that our American diplomacy, our narrative would be about HIV/AIDS programming and being able to bring kind of Peace Corps volunteers out to the world. In a place like Norway, which has more electric vehicles than anywhere else in the world, and is very advanced, we're trying to find ways to explain that we support climate change and what's happening back home. And they probably watch CNN more than anyone I know. So we really have to understand, how are we going to explain American policy and what we have in common. A lot of times we talk about education. On my team, I have an education advisor, and she tries to help with exchanges so that American students could study here in Norway and Norwegians would study in the US, and that happens around the world. With COVID, it's been a little bit challenging, but there are a lot of ways that we do those exchanges. So that's a product that we market, right? And that's something that we talk about. We write a lot of stories about alumni. Ryan, we do the similar kind of thing where we have government exchange programs. We look for leaders kind of 30 to 45 years old, roughly, and identify the next leader in their field. And it can be a journalist, or it can be a healthcare worker, and it could be anybody, and send them on these exchanges with people of similar mindset or similar background. And those people then become alumni, and we really try to lean heavily on them to be a voice for the government, because how boring is it to hear kind of wah from the same people in suits in Washington? I mean, it's enough already. In certain media markets, it works better than others. Certain types of messages need to have that prestigious person saying it, but in most cases, it's much more believable when somebody who's from your neighborhood can give you an example of how they saw some kind of genuine action and a real exchange. So that's one side of what happens every day. We do a lot of these kinds of exchanges and cultural exchanges and bringing American sports stars and coaches over to do these kinds of, where we are similar and where we are different. In terms of cultures. But something else I do, which I think you might be interested in hearing about, is that as a spokesperson, I can talk to the press. So if the local newspaper in Norway calls and they would like a statement about what did the president really say at the COP summit in Glasgow, I would have the ability to respond to them, or choose not to, or choose how we respond, or say, I'm not going to be able to tell you anything, but if you look at our social media accounts, we've put up some official language. And most of the time, what they just need is a voice or a person on camera with their branded microphone saying exactly the same thing that they might have already read in a newspaper, but it personalizes it. And so I do some kind of three things I thought I'd mention that are interesting, I think. One of those is what I call just backgrounders. We go, like tomorrow, I'm going to the biggest newspaper here in Oslo, and I'm bringing the head of the embassy with me. It's not an ambassador because we don't have an ambassador right now, but she's acting. So, and it is off the record, kind of a backgrounder. They want to know, basically, is America back? Everybody here watched the Trump administration, and I serve under all administrations. I was hired under the Bush administration. I served Obama. I'm not political, but here in Norway, there was a big dip in public opinion on America during the Trump administration. We had less in common, and everyone's wondering, is America back? And so in order for them to really build trust and get to know us, myself and my head of embassy, who arrived here in July, we're going to all the newsrooms and we're sitting with them, and they're asking us whatever questions they want, and we're prepared off the record to give them a sense of the kind of things that we could talk about on the record down the road. So they bring in their news editors and their foreign desks, and it's really kind of building trust. Now, the flip side of that is how I prepare my boss. We do things called murder boards here. Is that a phrase people know? No, you guys look like I'm nuts. Okay, so we call it a murder board. And essentially, let's say it's an ambassador, which is the head of any embassy, the top person. That, I'll give you this example, what happened in Bangkok. We got an appointee, somebody that President Trump said, you're going to now be the ambassador, and Congress approved him, and he showed up there, and he's not a career diplomat like myself. And he said, I'm very good at a lot of things, but I've never done press in my life. So we started doing this series of on-camera and also just verbal practices. And we would come up with, all the people in the embassy internally would come up with the hardest questions we could think of and ask them to him. And then we would practice answers, so that if he was walking out of a building or an event one day and somebody put a camera in his face, or we got the toughest questions at a reception or something, he was ready to give answers. And it's a really fun thing to do. I think when I was a journalist back at the Collegian, I thought I was trying to like surprise people with very clever questions. And that was my job, was to kind of get them. Right now, what we do a lot of is get themes at least of questions in advance so that we can be prepared and actually give substantive answers. Because the worst thing that could happen as a journalist is you get these kind of blah responses that aren't meaty enough to even use, and it was a waste of time. So what I do is a lot of that legwork, knowing the kinds of things they're going to talk about. I mentioned China was a big issue in Bangkok. Here, who's the neighbor to the north is Russia. So, big issues here. So the last interview that I helped prepare someone for, we did a 10-minute media prep and I peppered her with questions, the hardest things I could think of. This is what this media environment wants to know. And then what's the tone? I need you to be honest. If you can't answer, I want you to say, I can't give you an answer on that. And move on, right? So anyway, we do these murder boards. That's what we call them. I wonder where that phrase came from. I don't think I made it up. But, and then we do some journalist trainings in places like Zimbabwe, where I worked. Journalism, they got paid $5 a story, whether it was a long story or a short story, or if it was on time or if it was late. And so the way that we could attract them to our briefings or to cover things that we did was to serve lunch. And that's not deep integrity journalism, right? And so investigative stories still paid $5, and printing our press release, you got paid $5. And it wasn't really $5, but it was $6. But the point is, we did a lot of training so people had the right words to be able to cover these issues, and that was interesting. So sorry if I'm taking too much time. The only other thing I was going to mention is that kind of in diplomacy, being here in Oslo, you might know that the Nobel Peace Prize gets awarded out of Oslo every year. All the other Nobel Prizes like physics and chemistry and math and things in Sweden, but here it's the Peace Prize. And so this year, the Nobel Peace Committee gave the prize to 2 journalists. And that's Maria Reza, who was from Philippines, and Dmitry, every time his last name escapes me, a Russian journalist who kind of defied the odds of being able to report honestly. So I would say that in some ways, I'm still doing the same kind of journalism every day and supporting journalists and the integrity. We do a lot of fact-checking workshops, a lot of kind of disinformation, countering disinformation and those things, which are probably things that come up either in your coursework or your daily life. So sorry, long answer. Those are things I do every day.
Thank you. That was very thorough. I feel like I have a good idea of what you do now. I also forgot to mention, if anybody has any questions throughout, just drop them in the chat and we can get to those in a minute here. So I guess to the sort of meat of it, what sort of strategies do you guys use sort of day to day in, building yourself into the community? Like how do you get to the point, Jillian, that you can bring the head of the embassy to the newspaper and have that sort of meeting? Because that's something I imagine you have to build to. What do you do to build relationships with sources and the people around you to get to the point where you need to put out solid work?
Ryan,
if you want to start this.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, I've got the benefit, James, of living and working working on campus and living a mile from campus and being an alum. So, with the university community, you're sort of in it so much, and it is its kind of own entity in a way. I don't like the bubble thing is maybe a little bit overstated, but we're if you're here, you're here. You're kind of in the midst of it. So so I think it's a little bit of an unusual setup, compared to a lot of jobs that are related to journalism, where you're part of the organization, the community that you're covering in a relatively unusual way. We're not breaking hard news here at the Alumni Magazine. Obviously, we're not doing investigative reporting. So I don't have to worry about sort of, being too close to, sources. I've had jobs in the past where, in my newspaper days, early in my career, that's something obviously I have to be mindful of. Where I am now, though, being close to a lot of people on campus is a good thing. I know what's going on. A lot of my friends and neighbors are faculty members or, coaches or, staff members or administrators. One of my son's best friends is like a vice president. And so, it's good. Those are good things. There's a sense of friendship there. And so you get a sense of what's going on. Sometimes you find out what's going on behind the scenes, things that might be happening soon that haven't happened yet. So again, we're not covering breaking news. We're not looking to expose a story per se, but we do want to know what's going on. We want to try to cover the university, and not all the news is always good. And so, that's really big. And a lot of that is just physically being here. Doesn't involve a lot of effort in that sense sometimes. It's just being a friend and a neighbor to the people who are also part of this community, the university community. Having said that, there absolutely are times, and it's something that I think we can always do better as a staff here at the Alumni Magazine, of making sure that we're sort of proactively getting in touch with folks around not only University Park, but all the Penn State campuses, and reaching out and saying, hey, what's going on with you, at your campus or in your department or your division? What's coming up? What are you guys working on that might be a really big deal or a really cool story to tell soon? Or what's the story that's happening, that's a big deal for you guys right now, but the rest of the world doesn't really know about. So a lot of times it's just reaching out, and that goes back to, beat reporting 101 stuff, from being on the Collegian, or again, my first couple of newspaper jobs where, you develop sources and you just kind of build those lines of communication up. And, you're not always talking to someone specifically for an interview, right? A lot of times you're just reaching out to touch base and say, hey, how you doing? How are things? And, a little bit of small talk. And in some cases you do develop, friendships of a sort there, but ultimately you're building some level of trust and familiarity so that when, you need to talk to these folks for when it matters, there's a comfort level there, there's a familiarity there, there's a trust level there, a professional trust, even if you're not, friends per se. And so, yeah, that's absolutely part of it for us too. And in those cases, it's not always folks I know, it's not always, neighbors or friends or whatever, but it's folks on campus where we just, again, it's something we could do more and should do more, but we try to do at least sometimes. We reach out to folks in different colleges and, what's the most interesting thing that your faculty members are working on in EMS or science or ag or whatever. I've got a friend who's the university architect, the university planner. And so, I don't have to tell anybody here, right? There's constantly changes on this campus, constantly expanding and evolving, and things are getting torn down and built up. And, so we see all that happening, but I know those things are happening, being planned 4, 5, 6, 7 years out. So trying to get a sense of what's coming up, and maybe that inspires some coverage for us, some planning down the road. So I think it's just being present and reaching out to folks and keeping your ears open. And again, it's different if I were covering, a COPS beat or something, or, local government, it's a little bit different vibe, right? But I think it's not that different. You're still building relationships, and you're still, kind of, again, building that comfort level and building and sustaining those, those communication lines, because those will allow you to do your reporting when you need to.
Yeah, I would say exactly that. And I think, I kind of do this thing where when you watch TV and you think about kind of diplomats and all these receptions and so on, I think it all seems very stiff sometimes. And I think sometimes I come into a room and people are surprised that I'm just a regular person. And I always tell everybody that, my audience is always my mom. My mother lives outside Chicago, and if she doesn't understand what I'm saying, nobody's going to understand what I'm saying. We need to actually just speak very clearly and kind of get to the baseline of it. When people need a soundbite, people need a quote, you really just need to talk to my mom. And I mean, I'll do this with ambassadors. I'll walk into, high level people and say, that's really terrific, your comments on supply chains. My mom does not know what you're talking about. And I'll really kind of, I think that might be a great strength, where I used to get kind of scared. Like, the New York Times would write to me with frequency back in Bangkok on migration from Burma issues. And I was like, oh, what? My mom doesn't understand this. We need to clarify what's happening here. And the truth is that there are some people who I've worked with who, in fact, right now on my team, who are not allowed to talk to journalists because they kind of forget where the lines are in terms of what is the story we want to tell, or what are we allowed to tell, or kind of what would a journalist do with that information. But then there are some who really understand we're just building relationships. So journalists would like to know that you're going to call them back. Journalists would like to know that if you invite them to a like a reception about artwork, they're probably not going to come and dig at you for some kind of story that's off the wall. I think that's really the answer, is being comfortable that everything is not a story. And so you want to actually just know people and know something about somebody. Your son plays soccer, you love that building, I do, gardening on the side, and actually know a person so that when they need something, because that's the pace of journalism, right? Somebody's going to need something. Somebody's on a deadline. Somebody's on a story. We had a stabbing here downtown today. Somebody's on the wire to report on this. At that time, they need to be able to come to me and say, in 10 minutes, I would like an answer on something. And we need to have built that up. So, for example, we do get togethers, like we're going to the newsroom, but we couldn't just call and say, hi, we want to come to the newsroom. First, we invited some of the journalists over to a reception just to see some artwork that we hung on the wall in our embassy. And we hung the artwork on the wall in the embassy because it's a story. We hung in, and it's by indigenous populations from the Arctic, and they did these pieces that are about climate change, and we put it up and timed it with the Glasgow conference. Well, I thought that was an awesome story and everybody should cover it. And I quickly learned here in this media environment that nobody would like me to pitch them on something that they should write. Whereas in other media environments, they were hungry for something to fill pages. So we invited people over. Isn't this pretty? Here's the story of the artwork. Thanks so much. And that's it. And we just mingled with various people. We got 4 invitations to newsrooms afterwards because we were just people who could hold a conversation that wasn't tense. We weren't scared to death that we were going to give them some kind of lead. I think you just have to be honest and know that there is such a thing as being too close to your sources. But for example, with this New York Times journalist, she and I became very good friends because most of what I'm doing, she does not care about. Most of what this sports reporter is writing about, I'm going to have one story every 2 years that's of interest. So if I go to the foreign news beat, I don't come every day to every conversation with some kind of like, guess what President Biden's talking about today? That's just not how it goes. And so I think that they appreciate somebody who can really be honest. But for my colleagues who shouldn't be talking to the press, what we train them on is they don't know when to stop talking. You don't have to answer every question. And we do practice kind of a pivot or just leaving quiet space. So I think I'll leave it there as well.
So there's a question from Jade, our editor-in-chief. She says, if you're, if someone is already sort of distrustful of the media or your specific outlet, or I guess in your case, Jillian, of whether it's the United States or your embassy or whatever, whoever you're dealing with, how do you reach them? How do you approach someone that there's not an objective relationship initially?
That's tricky. I don't know if there's, well, I guess to clarify, Jay, do you mean, how do you like what's the best means of communication to reach them, or like how do you get through to them?
I was thinking like, how do you get through to them? Like, how do you get them to feel comfortable talking to you?
Right. It's hard. I think, again, having that relationship existing is ideal. But if you don't, some people are not going to come around, and that's part of the gig, I think, is accepting that sometimes, it's not to say you don't try, but sometimes some folks just are not going to come around. I've had it happen a few times. Again, even here, and for us, if we're reaching out to an alum, you're a Penn State alum, and we're getting in touch with you, to do a story that's like going to be a good thing, right? We're not going to the alumni magazine's not reaching out to you to like make you look bad, right? Generally speaking. But we've had a handful of occasions where someone was like, yeah, no, I don't want to talk about that. Or I don't want to do a story. I don't want to talk to the media, whatever. And it's sort of like, we're with the alumni magazine, it'll be a really positive piece. In this case, I can tell you that, it's not, you can, make sure if there's anything sensitive, we can address that. Like it's, and some people just aren't going to turn on that. I think trying to let them know up front, honestly, I think being honest up front about, hey, here's the story we want to tell, here's the story that we're working on and why we think you should be a part of it, whether it's about this person or they're just a source for a bigger story. I think being really honest up front about what you're working on, what the angle is, the more you can do that, the better. And usually I think people will come around in most cases. Again, it's not getting into sensitive stuff. Jillian certainly may have instances of folks who are, where it's a little bit different, where the stakes are a little higher or the subject's a little more, sensitive. But I think for the most part, yeah, if you're just upfront with people, if you're straight with people, I think that goes a long way for most folks. I think most people do want to talk, right? I think it's one of the realities of our job that we figure out pretty quick is people do want to talk about their experience, their perspective. We're all, I don't know if it's ego or whatever it is about humans, but we like to run our mouths and talk about what we think or what we know. So yeah, I think usually that's enough, is to be upfront and honest and really say, yeah, lay it all out. Hey, here's what we're working on. Here's why it makes sense for us to talk to you. If you have any concerns, we can certainly talk through those. If you're worried that there's, you might say the wrong thing, or that there's some things you can say, but some things you shouldn't. Whatever, I think you can address that up front. But again, I think being honest is key. You don't want to betray trust. Both because it's just not a good habit to get into, and then obviously you burn bridges, and sometimes depending on your beat or the area you work in, the word gets out. Oh yeah, no, this person, you can't trust this person. And if you're covering an area, right? If you're covering a beat and there's other people and they talk, then that's going to make your own job harder for you. So I think honesty is definitely the best policy in that case.
Yeah, and everybody's got an angle. You have an angle. You need to write the story either because you want to, or you were told to, or and then the person you're interviewing has an angle. They have a particular narrative that they'd like to get out. And I think there is some kind of back and forth. Before I'll take an interview, I'll talk with them. What are you driving at? And I don't really need to know, it's their integrity. They need to keep something to themselves. But if I can better understand what they're going for, then I can say, I can't give you exactly what you're asking for, but I can give you something else that might work for you, and have a little bit of flexibility. I think that, a lot of times it is a little bit of trust, right? And I've been burned before where a journalist told me, I'm writing the story and we're just trying to find out a little bit more about, what US investments are in this region. And we'd love to hear, what industries you're focusing on. And then the story came out and it was an absolute blast on why the US is exploiting something. To me, that crossed the line, right? Because the premise of what was happening was false. If they called and said, we're doing a story about what they wrote about, I could have helped to express, my thoughts differently and still be part of that story, because we almost more want to be part of a story that is critical. But not understanding what the tone of it might be is tough. Now, there's another side to that. The journalist may have lost some control when it went to their editors. Just the other day, we did a 5-minute on-camera interview, and we knew, only probably a minute would ever run, if that. And so when it did come out, though, the cuts told a kind of funny story that wasn't my favorite. And yet it was totally within the realm of what the journalist originally asked for. And I sent a note and said, thanks, came out great. Because don't forget, I shouldn't forget, but we can't forget that it's hard. You're putting together a story and you've got layers and layers of things. And so the journalist should be proud of their product too. And us saying we saw it and that's great, well done, also builds that kind of trust. And, they'll come back to us. I think also in terms of, depends on your market, but, scoops, for example, we might have an op-ed and there's 6 different newspapers it could run in, and we want to go to a particular one and we know that they might be more receiving. So we really need to understand the editors. And so editors are very rarely the interviewers, right? They're not the ones doing the hard back and forth, but they're the ones who are going to sit in the room tomorrow when I bring my charge d'affaires, and they're going to be sitting there with their fingers, with their hands crossed like this. And what they're listening for is the tone. They're listening for kind of like a longer term angle. And so I think at least talking to them is important. So I see that there's a question from Jake about what are the biggest mistakes journalists make. How many, I get questions and then they don't tell me the deadline, which loses them usually a day, right? Hi, I just had a question. Could you answer something about when is the United States reopening to international travel? We're doing a story. Well, then I write back and say, great, let me get back to you. What's your deadline? And then they come back to me and they're like, well, my deadline was an hour ago. So I think that that's something which is helpful, because if I get it and it says my deadline's in an hour and I really want to be part of that story, I'm going to hustle and get it in. Maybe I didn't see the email. That's a different story. But if I can, I'm going to try. Or at least I can write back and say, oh man, there's no way I can make that 1 hour deadline. If you can give me until tomorrow at noon, I can definitely get you something. Then that journalist has a chance to go back to their editor and say, you know, if you want the US Embassy in it, we got to wait till tomorrow. And so I think that, you know, just coming straight forward, this is my deadline. And then I also really dislike these email requests, which are, if I don't hear from you by close of business, we're going to run the story with the embassy had no comment or something like that. And I mean, that's not building trust with me, right? And so that just sets, nobody likes that. That's just not honest or nice, or, you know, that's not good. So I think what I would say to this, my real one thing that I do that most of my colleagues don't do is I usually call. I'll get a request, often a text, and I will just pick up the phone, which seems like an ancient art, and listen to the person's voice. And it will help me very much in saying, yeah, I'm not going to make your deadline, or that's great. What about this? Could I answer this way? We're not going to be able to answer question 3, but question 4 for sure. Are you interested? Blah, 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 blah. And that helps me because I've got to clear everything. You can imagine. I've got to make sure that people, you know, in different positions clear. So pick up the phone. And when journalists actually call me, I like that too. So I'd say the biggest mistake is just kind of like banging out these emails. You didn't reply. You didn't reply. Well, you know, it's been an hour.
So you guys have been, each of you have been all over in, you know, the areas of places you've been. And Ryan, you switched mediums. You were initially newspaper and now you're in magazine. So I guess the question for Jillian would be more, you know, describe how is media different in, you know, Thailand to Norway to different places that you've been? What's the culture like, and how's that affect, you know, the work that gets put out there? And then to Ryan, you know, is there major differences between here and Wilkes-Barre and Bergen? And then what was it like, you know, shifting from newsprint to now magazine? What's the stylistic difference?
You want to go ahead, Jillian, or should I talk? Okay. Yeah, I mean, I've been in really different markets. Wilkes-Barre is I don't know if anybody knows it, but it's a, you know, a relatively small city. You know, it's an old like mining railroad town that, you know, whole Northeast Pennsylvania. You know, kind of a town, at least when I was there, was, you know, sort of trying to figure out what it was going to be, you know, because it wasn't sort of its best days were behind it. If it didn't figure something else out, was kind of the vibe there at the time. So stepping into that environment was very new for me. I came from like Southern California, like suburbs, sprawl. And so that was just adapting to that was really eye-opening. I made some of my most memorable mistakes, definitely as a writer, with some of the assumptions I had as a young journalist coming in and thinking I knew a lot more than I did in general, but particularly about the people I was covering. I was in a very different community than I'd grown up in. So that I learned a ton by screwing up, you know. But in a really valuable way. After that, I moved to North Jersey, so still a newspaper, but, you know, tri-state area, you know, outside of New York City, you know, a little more kind of just a different vibe, more fast paced, more kind of a, you know, thriving economically, at least in some ways, and just a different vibe, you know, and closer to New York City. So you kind of had the influence of the big city there and the pace of life and all of that. So I felt like that was good because I felt in my first couple of jobs, just in the space of like 3 years, I had very different experiences there. And I think the more different, you know, the broader your experience, the better off you're going to be, you know, if you're paying attention and learning from that. And then going to magazines, I moved to magazines really only about 3.5 years into my career, moved to New York City and some working and ultimately living in New York and Manhattan. And, the most fun job ever, was just watching basketball, writing about basketball, going to basketball games. It was a blast, and had incredible opportunities there. So it was a very different, very different vibe. And I think all of those combined probably prepared me pretty well for where I am now, because I'd done print, I'd done a lot of print, both newspaper and magazines. I'd done daily deadlines. I'd for a stretch between when I first got to the second job I had, they didn't have a sports staff opening at the time. So I was on the obit desk. I was doing 30 hours a week. I was taking calls from funeral homes, doing like the basic, information for death notices. And was not fun at all. But it's really good training, because if you've done that, that's like the most fundamental kind of reporting, right? Like who died, when did they die, where were they from, who's their family? Like you got to get everything right. And it's real fundamental. And, it's also like the least fun part of it. So once you've done that, kind of everything else after that is a little more enjoyable. But I also had a chance to cover sports, and then I also had a chance to do like feature writing, and I freelanced for the music and the arts and entertainment desk. So I kind of had a chance to have a broad experience in a few very different environments. And ultimately where I am now, like I said, because what we cover is so broad, there's heavier, serious stories. There's stories that are based on science and research and newsier things. But there's also stuff that's lighter and more fun and featurey. So I kind of had, the chance to do enough different things that when I came here, where it's a job where there's all kinds of different things, big stories, little briefs, profiles, newsier stuff, all that kind of diverse background in the first decade or so of my career was really valuable. The one thing I will say too is, I was here in 2011 and 12 when we kind of had to figure out how to cover the Sandusky scandal, which is mind blowing to me that that's been 10 years now. And so to be in a position where we had to cover that as the alumni magazine, and to be given the freedom, in part, I think, because folks on campus who might have discouraged us were too busy with other things to really worry about us. We were able to kind of approach it really the way we wanted to, and in a really kind of honest way. And so having some news reporting background and having feature writing background and having, being used to daily deadlines and longer deadlines, all of that really came in handy for an issue that we really had to scramble and kind of come up with from scratch and turn around in a much tighter schedule than we usually did. And do some hard reporting, especially over the following year or two, as we kind of, covered the continued fallout from that. So, one of my, I think, biggest, getting back hopefully to James' question, like one of my things in my career, I think I've been luckiest is that I've been to have a chance to do a lot of different things, and that's prepared me well for this job. And I highly encourage, even if you think like this is the one thing you want to cover, like don't be afraid to branch out as a freelancer or try different opportunities. It'll make you a better writer, make you a better reporter. It just makes you a more well-rounded person. So.
Yeah, I love everything that Ryan's saying. And when I do some career talks, I always say, try lots of different things. I did some various mediums, some work for some local magazines, wrote for some newsletters, different types of things in different fields as well. And all of them help create this narrative of, what skills I gained here and there. So I definitely think you can't go wrong. In this job, I create content, just like you're creating content. And I really need to understand, who am I targeting for this content? So for example, we do so much digital output right now. On my team, I have a social media coordinator. I have somebody who's tracking media and giving us a morning media report of what's in the local news, somebody else who's kind of scanning international and so on. And we need to figure out, what are we gonna put out there? And there's not that much interest necessarily, right? So, on Twitter, we're doing more policy things. People are looking for news. On Instagram, we're doing things that are pretty and beautiful and catch somebody's eye. There are things that we need to think about, though. So for example, in Thailand, people are on their phones. I can't recall, it was like 170% penetration of phone usage, because people have at least 2 phones. And so you just see everybody scrolling down, banging into each other, walking on subways and so on, because everybody's on their phone and they're not reading. And we found that if our Facebook content was more than a sentence, nobody would read it. And actually then we learned the sentence was too long. So we started doing infographics. And if you want to try and explain complicated policy in an infographic, a one screen, talk to my social media team there in Bangkok. They came up with great ways that we could draw people's attention with something that looked good and get a little bit of message out, but also maybe with a little bit of humor. I think we have to really think about who we're reaching and where. And so nobody's really coming to an embassy website. Nobody's coming to an embassy newsletter. We're going to try and blast these things out and we'll get, like a 16% open rate. So we really need to go where people are. And that is how we need to change our content. Here in Norway, there's almost nothing I can tell people that they can't get somewhere else. They can just go watch it on CNN. They're reading the New York Times before I even wake up, or the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal. They're doing this. They've got all their streaming, it's pretty saturated. So what is my added value? And I think that's really a question that anybody working at a newspaper or working at any organization, alumni association, what's your added value? What kinds of stories or what kind of narratives am I going to be able to put out there that they're not getting somewhere else? And maybe it's just that I'm putting it in a more digestible fashion. I mean, there's a reason why sometimes we print articles in a Q&A format. There's a reason why magazines, do big pictures and small captions. And I think that those are some tactics that we, in government at least, have really had to take on, because prose isn't going to get us as far, depending on who your audience is, right? So that's something that we think about. Who reads the paper these days? Like, really, who reads the paper? If really who reads the physical paper is me on a Sunday when I have a vacation twice a year, and also people who are 75 to 85 years old, is that my target audience? Maybe, but maybe not. And so where we spend our time is really analyzing who we're trying to reach, right? So if I'm writing an article, I remember writing some kind of article with Collegian on like bicycle locks and they were getting broken, and like, who wants that article and how can I make it interesting for them? What I should have done, knowing what I know now and in this modern day and age, is, like, try it myself or do some kind of a YouTube video. This is how you break a bike rack, and why is it happening all over campus? Or, something that's going to actually appeal. For us here, we really are trying to reach youth audiences. And I graduated from Penn State in 1998, so I am not a youth audience. I actually used to have breakfast with the team with Joe Pa back in like 94 and 5 and 6 seasons, I think, when I was working for Penn State Sports Info. So all the Sandusky stuff when it broke was really really something. I used to be in the locker room sometimes. So really super interesting. But I mean, I really need to think about who wants that story and how am I getting it to them. And I'm not youth. And so if that is the way things are going, I have now hired 2 university interns to stay with us through the whole academic year, because they're going to help me, like I tell them, they're going to help me be cool. They're going to help me understand the phrasing and how I need to be talking and where I need to be. And like, don't waste your time going to this festival and trying to set up a booth on US education exchanges, because those people only like the UK or whatever. So it's a lot of listening and getting people around you who maybe know better, because I change environments every roughly 3 years. So, drop me into Norway in July, and by now I feel like I've got 10% of my feed about me, but I'm really listening.
There was a question from Kit, and I want to make sure I didn't miss from a few minutes ago. You feel there's a difference between working for a magazine that has allowed you to be closer to sources if you wanted, rather than when you worked for other news outlets prior in your career? Definitely, and I think that works for me. I don't sort of have that really hard nose that I think great news journalists have. I don't have that. I've had to do it at certain times in my career, and I can kind of fake it temporarily. But I think some people are really naturally kind of gifted that way. One of my former colleagues here, Lori Shantz, who was on the magazine for a while and was the advisor to the Awesome group on campus when she was here, and is now out teaching at the University of Oregon, but she was on our staff. when we were covering the Sandusky scandal, and to have someone like her who was like really hard-nosed news reporter background was invaluable. She just had a perspective that like didn't come as naturally to me. For a job like this, and for someone like me who's kind of more suited to like feature stuff, it's a good fit for me. I think, it's not that you don't have to ask hard questions sometimes, and I'm okay doing that. But I think I'm probably better suited to a job where it is a little bit more about relationships. It's not, it's okay if the stories are pretty, we don't write PR, we don't write marketing copy here. We write, journalistic features, and we do journalism here in the sense of our reporting and stuff. But again, we're not doing investigative reporting. We're not looking to dig up dirt. I am a Penn State employee at the end of the day. So, and I have a mortgage and kids. So, it's got to be my priority. So yeah, it is a difference. And I think some people are better suited to the one than the other. But I'm happy that this place is closer to, a newsstand magazine in a lot of ways. And we're doing real journalism here for the most part. But it is a job that allows, for good relationships with the people that we do cover oftentimes. And yeah, it's different. But for me, at least, I think it's a good thing.
All right. My computer died. I knew it was going to, but yeah, apologies for that. I've jumped in with Kit here. We've probably got time for one more question, and it's a basic one, but I think I have to ask it. To both of you, what advice do you have for any of us, whether that's in journalism or magazine writing, or whether that's in the realm of, foreign service or diplomacy? How can we, improve our work, and what do we do to end up like you guys?
You want to go, Jillian?
Sure.
I feel like
Sure.
I'm always going first. So.
Yeah, it was good. We were doing that. It was working. So Juan, great questions. James, thanks so much. I'm really glad to chat with you. If anybody does want to hear more about, diplomacy or foreign service or anything, one day, please do reach out. And you can find me on LinkedIn, or it's a rare last name, so easy to find. James can give you my email. Feel free, James, to do that if someone asks. But I would say advice is kind of do things that make you happy, that feel fun, that you feel inspired by, and take some risks. I like telling a story about my brother who was in finance, and then he left it to open a dumpling cart. And my mother, my parents had a heart attack, like, what a dumpling cart, what's happening? And then he kind of grew tired of it after a couple of years and went back to finance. My parents said, you're never going to be able to get a job in finance after you're doing this dumpling cart thing. And he went back and interviewed and said, I always was advising people about how to spend their money and take risks, but I'd never taken one myself. And now I can tell them more honestly and legitimately what it feels like to take a risk. And so they really could trust me more. And I like to tell that example because, if I'm not saying open a dumpling cart, but if you're inclined to, just use what you've got. Make yourself a narrative that you leverage all the different skills and things that you're good at. I think these days there are so many types of careers and options, but I would keep people near. Like, I'm still in touch with my journalism teacher from high school, and she was really inspiring to me. And we just touch base like on birthdays on Facebook and things like that. See how old I am? I'm on Facebook. So I think, learn from people. It's so nice that you do these sessions. I love hearing what Ryan's saying. There's so many different ways that people can contribute to community that just being out there and hearing people's stories hopefully is inspiring. And then you never know what you're going to hear about. I don't think there's any wrong way to go, except for not trying, not being out there. So that's kind of my general advice. And I always like the short-term plan and the long-term plan, like reach for your dreams. And if you don't get there right away, do something in between. I think a lot of people your ages want to go directly to the dream job and the dream thing that you always wanted to do, but there might be a curvy road on the way there, and there could be 10 different ways of getting there. Put in the time, try some different things, because when you get there, it'll feel so much better. All well here. I'll sign off so you don't have to hear that.
I'd echo everything Jillian said. Particularly the part about taking a risk. My first job, I set up in Wilkes-Barre, the daily newspaper. It was nothing glamorous, but it was a full-time job right out of college. And I left it after about a year and a half, and I took that part-time job in New Jersey, working the obit desk, which was a pay cut, and I didn't have benefits. But my girlfriend was in Jersey, now my wife, and so we were trying to get in the same place. But it also got me to a bigger paper. But it took me taking kind of a half step back then to have a chance to take that step forward. It eventually got me to, like I said, when I was at Slam in New York, and the most fun job ever, and then eventually got me back here. So you never know, sometimes you make a sacrifice like that, and it pays off for you. You guys hear it, I'm sure, all the time. It's a challenging industry. It's changed so much since we were in school. It's changed so much since I was at my previous job, but if you guys have a passion for it, then stick with it. And I'd say, keep trying to get better. Read good writing. Read good writing. Read, and not just news writing. I mean, read good features, read good books, fiction and nonfiction. Right. I mean, the better reader you are, the better writer I think you'll become. And it just makes you smarter and savvier and more empathetic. And so yeah, stick with it and be versatile and try to have different experiences in your work and in your life. Write about different things, challenge yourself to cover things, or write about things, or pay attention to things you maybe wouldn't think you were interested in, or might not know much about. I think all that stuff pays off. Again, I think it's enriching for life, and certainly has a chance to help you in your career. So you guys are in a good place. You're, I think, a really good program, and obviously a great paper right now. So, so you made good choices already. So keep it up.
All right, Jordan. What do we do from here?
No, so all great. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jillian. Thank you, Ryan. I'm well out of college too, and I love participating in these sessions to hear as well as everything going on. So thank you again for your time. And I think everybody has your email addresses. They may reach out to you. If not, we can certainly make that connection. But thanks again, everybody. So, and
I'll throw out, I know Jillian's on the other side of the world, but I am right here on campus. So feel free to reach out as well, but I'm always happy to meet someone for coffee or something as well. So.
That's a very valuable invite. That's so wonderful. Awesome. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.